Hello and welcome to the Allplane podcast, where we talk with aviation professionals from all over the world to explore different aspects of this fascinating industry. Let me start, as always, with a reminder that you can find these and all the preceding episodes of the Allplane podcast, as well as many other interesting stories about aviation and airlines, on our website, Allplane.tv. I repeat, Allplane.tv. This year marks the 100th anniversary of one of the world's oldest and most iconic airlines. I am talking about Qantas of Australia. In case you didn't know, Qantas stands for Queensland and Northern Territory Air Service, and it is precisely in the state of Queensland where a non-profit organization has assumed the task of preserving Qantas' rich heritage. The Qantas Founders and Outback Museum is located in the small town of Longreach in the interior of Queensland. This is a place that is strongly connected to the origins of the airline, since it was near here where the airline was first incorporated and where it built its first maintenance hangar in the 1920s. This museum has an amazing collection of restored aircraft from different periods of Qantas history, including a Boeing 747, a Boeing 707, and a recently restored Super Connie aircraft, as well as other exhibits. I spoke with Nicole Kuttner, communications manager at the museum, in order to learn more about this institution and get an idea of what visitors see when they get there. This is definitely a place that I'm adding to my bucket list. In the meantime, enjoy the show. Hello, Nicole. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. I hope you're well.
Yeah, so you are joining us from the sunny part of Australia. That's in Queensland, on the north of Australia, right? And Longreach, where the Qantas Founders Museum is located.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm enjoying a beautiful winter's day, and we're in Longreach, which is in outback Queensland, so about 1,200 kilometers west of the coast of Australia.
Very interesting. We are definitely going to revisit this, the geographical angle, because that's a part of Australia that is not usually in the tourist itinerary. So I'm just gonna get you to tell us a bit more about this area and what people can do there and how can they get to the museum. But before that, let me introduce you. So basically, you are communications manager for the Qantas Founders Museum, an organization that it's not part of Qantas, although you work closely with the airline to preserve the legacy of one of the oldest airlines in the world that has just turned 100.
Yeah, that's correct. So our community here in Western Queensland wanted to set up a museum to tell the history of Qantas, which was established in Western Queensland. And so they formed a committee and set up a museum, a very small museum at the time. And while we're not owned or operated by Qantas, they definitely have assisted us during our journey, you know, whether that's with artifacts or financial donations. But this museum was really set up for the community and run by the community. So it's a really special museum and a much bigger museum now than it was when it first opened in 1996.
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't been there yet, but I have the chance to do some research for a couple of articles I wrote that were featuring the museum. Both were published on CNN. One was about airline museums, and another one was about a very interesting project we're gonna discuss now, where you brought a Super Constellation aircraft that was in the Philippines, and you brought it back to Australia and you restore it, and now it's basically one of the main pieces of your collection. And I have seen the different areas you have in the museum. We're gonna now visit them one by one, but basically you have a pretty impressive collection. So you have a Boeing 747, you have a Boeing 707, you have a DC-3, you have a Super Constellation aircraft, and you've recently added as well a special facility to do light and music shows, right, with this aircraft.
Yeah, so our museum was established to tell the story of Qantas, so the early days of Qantas, and we've extended that story to sort of present day. So we are slowly adding more stories. So while our museum isn't just about the aircraft, we do have some pretty iconic aircraft, as you've mentioned. So yeah, the Super Constellation being the most recent. Now, those 4 aircraft, so the Boeing 747, the 707, the DC-3 and Super Constellation, we're outside. And while Longreach is a great place to store aircraft, it's lovely and dry, the sun can be quite damaging to the aircraft from a paint and sort of, cockpit glass perspective. And also just a bit uncomfortable for some of our visitors, especially in summer when it gets quite warm. So we built this air park roof, which is a 8,000 square meter roof over those 4 aircraft. So you can imagine it's quite an impressive structure. It can be seen, kilometers out of town. It's the largest structure in Longreach now. And what we decided to do is also design a what we're calling luminescent Longreach. So it's a light and sound immersive experience. So we actually tell the story of Qantas by projecting 3D animation onto our Boeing 747 fuselage. So that's the majority of the show, but we also project onto our Super Constellation and our 707. And it's a pretty incredible experience, something people would never have experienced before, especially in that setting underneath the roof amongst these incredible aircraft. So yeah, that's been running since the 1st July and really popular. So we're really happy with that.
Mm-hmm. So the museum was inaugurated in the late 1990s, from what I read. Can you tell us a bit more about who's behind the museum? Because are you a non-profit organization? What sort of links do you have with Qantas, the airline? You are not part of Qantas, right? You're a separate organization, but you obviously have a close relationship with them.
Correct, absolutely correct. So the Qantas Founders Museum is a not-for-profit organization. So in the late 80s, the community got together to set up a museum to tell the story of Qantas. And that really came about because Qantas had gifted the community an Avro 504K replica. Now that aircraft was the first aircraft that Qantas got. And that led to the community wanting to set up a museum for this artifact. And we sort of worked very hard, and in 1996 we opened in the National Heritage Listed Qantas hangar. So that's the hangar Qantas actually operated from in 1922. And from there the museum grew. So we now have a much bigger main museum, and now we have the air park as well. So the museum is not for profit. It's run by a board of directors, all volunteers. We have 2 Qantas appointed directors, so that keeps our link with Qantas. And while we're not owned or operated by them, we have a really great working relationship with them. So, example is they let us use the name Qantas in our name. But more importantly, they're just there to help us, for projects like the Super Constellation. They helped us with recovery teams to move the aircraft, metal sheet workers to help with, restoring the aircraft. In the past, they've donated artifacts. They've also helped us financially at times. So while we're not dependent on them, we do work really well with them, and we're very thankful for their support over the years. But the museum itself stands by itself and employs the local people here in Longreach. So, we employ anything from 35 to 50 staff in a year. So one of the major employers in town as well.
Mm-hmm. Because the link between Qantas and Longreach, is it because Qantas started in Longreach or nearby, right? You have a 1922 hangar that's still there. It was one of the original buildings used by the airline, if I understood it correctly. And it was actually featured in a recent, the 100th anniversary safety video that Qantas released. I'm going to put a link to this video in the show notes. And that's the original hangar where Qantas, in case someone doesn't know, Qantas stands for Queensland and Northern Territory Air Service.
That's correct. So the Qantas was actually the first board meeting was held in Winton, which is a town about 180 k's west of Longreach. And at that board meeting, they decided to move the main operations to Longreach because that's where the railways sort of ended. So they moved here in 1921. built this new hangar, which is not so new now. It's been there since 1922. And it's the oldest aviation building in Australia now, so it's pretty significant. And yeah, so when Qantas was doing their safety video, they really wanted to sort of pay tribute to their incredible history. And so for the 1920s segment, they came out here, and we had to move some of our replica aircraft. So we have a DH-50 and a DH-61 and an Avro. So we moved that out so they could film their safety video, which was great fun and a really wonderful experience. And we're very thankful that they do acknowledge the history that comes back all the way to outback Queensland. Yeah, it looked great in the final product.
Yeah, it's definitely an amazing video. I track many of the videos and I publish when there's something really interesting. I publish it in the Allplane blog, and I must say that this one was really, really outstanding. So I'm going to post a link in the show notes. So basically, the start of Qantas, well, the original mission of Qantas was to, if I understood correctly, was to link let's say the terminus of the railway to other locations farther to the north and to the west. So remote outposts. Is this right?
Yeah, that is correct. So the government, how Qantas really started is, Hudson Fish and Paul McGuinness in 1919 drove from Longreach to Darwin, setting up airfield for a race that was coming to Australia from the UK. And along the way, they realized how remote these communities were, how cut off they were, especially in the rainy season, where you just can't get out, before tarmac roads and things. And they wanted to set up an aerial service to connect them, and more importantly, to get a mail contract, which is where the money really was, not really in passengers back then, to connect, these communities together. So these mail contracts, were for the areas that didn't have a railway. And so Qantas would initially start that by their mail service and slowly extend their routes as the company grew. But, even today, when it rains, if we have anything from 25 to 100 mils or 2 to 3 inches, towns are cut off. People can't get in from their properties because the roads are muddy and sticky, and so air travel is still important today. It's still, we still have the Royal Flying Doctor Service helping us out if there's major incidents here in Longreach. So the idea hasn't faded. It's still needed today. Mm-hmm.
Because the distances in Australia, I mean, are in such a scale that for me are difficult to imagine. I'm based in Europe, and here we basically count everything with by the mile, and there you have like hundreds of miles. So basically, if you want to get to Longreach, which the name itself of the place already implies some distance from other places, right? So what's the best way to get there? Do you have what's the closest international gateway? Is it Brisbane? And how you get from there to Longreach and to the museum?
Yeah, look, the closest gateway would probably be Brisbane. So you have a couple of options. You can drive, which depending on which route you take, so either the inland route or sort of drive to the coast and down the coast, it's anything from 1,200 to 1,400 kilometers or 12 to 14 hours. Or you can catch the train. We have a twice weekly train from Brisbane, and that takes 26 hours. So it's not a fast train like you get in Europe. It's a lovely slow train, but you've got to have the time. And then fortunately we have daily services with Qantas Link connecting us to Brisbane, and that's a 2-hour flight in a Dash 8. Mm-hmm. So it seats about 70 people. So we're very lucky to have it. It's not necessarily the cheapest flight, but it's definitely cheaper than flying. And we do get resident fares here as locals in Longreach. But those are your options to get to Longreach. So a lot of tourists, what they do is they get their caravans and make a trip of it. You're going to drive 1,400 kilometers. You may as well make it a journey. And
what do you get to see besides the museum? Is it an outback landscape? Are there other interesting things to do around for people that wish to make the trek from the coast?
Yeah, so Longreach has, we're very lucky in this region to have great tourist attractions. So we have our museum, which you've mentioned. We have the Australian Stockman's Hall of Fame, which tells the history of the Australian stockman. And not just the European stockman, we're talking about the Indigenous stockman as well, and their incredible skills and how they, work this land to raise cattle and sheep and livestock. So that's another major attraction here in Longreach. We have a powerhouse museum, so a local museum here. And then we've got some great tour operators that do tours along our river. So we have a river here in Longreach, the Thompson River. So beautiful sunsets and cruises there. And then we have a couple of tourist operators that do shows, like stockman shows, as well as a Cobb and Co ride. So Cobb and Co being a carriage transport company in the sort of 18th, 19th century. So you can get to experience the glamour of, or not so much glamour, of traveling in a carriage. So there's an awful lot to do. And as for the landscape, yes, it's outback. So I'm currently looking out onto sort of an open field, with grass, although it's drought. So it's pretty dry, but, just wide open spaces, blue sky, very little vegetation, but just the open space is just really liberating. It's really wonderful actually to be out here compared to living in a city where you sort of struggle to find a park or an open space.
So it's a bit like the quintessential Australian landscape that we foreigners imagine, especially the ones that haven't been there, and maybe we have this stereotype, but actually you can go there and experience this type of landscape.
Absolutely. We're the stereotypical landscape, and if you go further west than us, you start to get big red sand dunes because it becomes real desert country. So the further west you get, the redder the soil gets. So it's quite a lovely destination.
Sounds an interesting place. Definitely adding it to the bucket list. Also, this year is a very important year for the museum and for Qantas because it's the 100th anniversary of the airline. Started in 1920, so that makes it one of the second oldest in the world, still operating after KLM. And you have prepared a whole range of activities to mark this date. I guess the pandemic has kind of affected these plans a little bit, but can you tell us a bit more about what are you doing for this very important anniversary?
Yes, so Qantas was started on the 16th, or established, or the company was registered on the 16th of November 1920. So this was going to be, in 2020 was going to be a big year for the museum, big year for Qantas. It's pretty incredible for an airline to survive 100 years. I mean, there's been lots of ups and downs in that 100 years. And our museum tells a lot of the stories of the 1920s, 30s, where they barely made it through that, let alone the rest of the next 70 to 80 years. So this year we did have a year of centenary events, so dinners and family weekends and exhibitions, and the pandemic did put a bit of a damper on those plans, so a lot of those events have had to be postponed, and we are currently looking to reschedule them for next year, but we will now be working to the restrictions that we have in Australia when it comes to social gatherings and that, which is fine. We're happy to abide by those because I think we'd rather be operating than not. So I'm happy to be part of the team there. But I think the 16th of November will still happen this year, and our museum hopefully will still be operating. That's our plan, and we'll have a big cake and cutting, and we'll have a new exhibition in, and we'll just really celebrate what's a really special day, and we expect some people to visit, those that can. So at the moment only Queenslanders can visit Queensland, but it's still a significant day, and even though it's a very different year to what we planned, Qantas and our community is really proud of what happened 100 years ago. And 1920 was just the registration. From now on, it's all the big anniversaries, the first board meeting, the first flight, the first passenger. So the next few years will actually be almost the bigger years to celebrate. So, COVID did put a damper on things, but there's still a lot to look forward to.
When was the first flight? Was it on 1920 as well, or a bit later?
Yeah, it was November 1922.
Okay, so it took a little bit between the registration and the time when they started flying. Well, I guess that gives you more time to, as you said, to mark different occasions, hopefully in a more, in different conditions without that much worry about the pandemic and all that. So basically, if I go to the museum, I will find these 4 magnificent aircraft that you have, but then you also have some exhibits, right? And I have seen on your website, you also have some tours where you show different aspects of the aircraft to the visitors. I guess those are guided tours. Can you tell us a bit more about all these extra things that people can see there when they visit?
Yeah, so our museum, our main museum building, if you walked into our main museum building, you'd walk into a big exhibition hall that has our Avro 504K replica right in the middle, so a good reminder of where it all started. And then around the Avro is displays that explain the 4 founders of Qantas, the 4 men that really started Qantas up. And
sorry, can I stop you? Can I stop you 1 second here? The Avro was the first aircraft that was flown by Qantas.
Yeah, well, the first aircraft that Qantas bought.
Okay. It's one of the aircraft that appears in the safety video.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. You were telling me about all the 4 people that were at the very start of the airline.
Yeah, so we those displays talk about the 4 founders and also the conditions that helped to start an airline out here, and that's sort of the thing I'd mentioned before, remote communities cut off by rain or distance, and explaining why it worked or how it worked. And then if you go out of the main exhibition hall, you'll see our Catalina display. So we have a Catalina PBY 6A. So it's not original Qantas Catalina, but we've restored it to look like one. We actually originally got it in Spain. It used to fight fires, about the right age. But yeah, we just made some changes to make it look like a Qantas Catalina. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to tell the story of the double sunrise flights. Some people might know these stories, but essentially Qantas crews in the Second World War used to fly between Perth and Sri Lanka, a flight that would average 28 hours non-stop. They'd fly in enemy territory and risk their lives to keep the connection between Australia and the rest of the world, or at least the UK. So a credible story. So we have a display about that, and it's an audio experience. And then if you keep walking past that, you'll get into our hangar, our National Heritage Listed hangar. So if you step in there, it's like you're stepping back into the 1920s. We've restored it to look like it would have when Qantas operated in there. So you can see where the engineers worked. You can see where they built planes, one of the few airlines to build their own aircraft. And we've got a couple of replica aircraft in there. We have a DH-50, a de Havilland 50, and a DH-61, which was the first aircraft, to have a toilet on board, while the DH-50 was the first aircraft to have a cabin. So, flying was already starting to change in the late 1920s. So it's a good introduction. And then we have several aircraft guided tours. So we have a platinum tour, we have a air park tour, and we have a 747 wing walk. The air park tour and the platinum tour really talk about the history of the aircraft, the significance of the aircraft we have outside. So that's the Boeing 747, 707, Super Constellation DC-3. We also show guests parts of the aircraft you wouldn't normally see as a passenger. So things like the black box, you get to look in the cockpit. You just get to spend a little more time with these aircraft than we do today as passengers. And then the Platinum Tour also includes walking out on the wing of the 747 and the 707. And our 707 was actually a private jet before we acquired it. So as part of the Platinum Tour, you actually get to go into the private rooms, the lounges and the bedrooms and the bathrooms. So that's a bit of fun for those that had the time. And it's a long tour. It's a 3.5-hour tour, but you get to see everything that those aircraft have to offer, and then visit the museum. The air park tour is an 1.5-hour tour, and then the wing walk tour is an 1-hour tour, and that takes you out on the wing of the 747 into the cockpit again of the 747 or the flight deck. We also talk about the cargo hold and the avionics bay. So you're seeing more than you would have on the air park tour. So we're, depending on your level of interest, we have different tours to offer.
Sounds very interesting. And actually, I was very surprised by what you said about the non-stop 28-hour flight in wartime. Wow, that's 28-hour flight. That's the original Project Sunrise. Now that Qantas is again trying to perform the longest flights in the world, they're planning to connect London and Sydney, I think. Now they do Perth to London, I think, non-stop. And yeah, that's really ultra long haul flight. Can you tell me a bit more about this project that you had for the super constellation? Because I remember that was a very interesting story. I did a story for CNN about this. I'm going to post the link in the show notes, but it would be great if you could briefly explain what it involved. That was basically discovering this super constellation in a sort of aircraft graveyard in the Philippines, I think. And then a whole set of things need to happen to bring it back to Australia and restore it to its original condition, I think. It was not a Qantas aircraft, but you restore it as it looked when Qantas operated Constellation.
Yeah, with pleasure. This is by far my most favorite aircraft, and partly because I've been involved in the project. So the museum had been looking for a super constellation for years, and we had various options, but none of them were original Qantas super constellations or constellations, because there was none intact. There were aircraft around the world, but they were in pieces. For example, there was one in Kuwait, but it had been used as target practice and it survived the war. And while we did salvage parts off it a few years ago, we were never going to be able to create a full display out of it. So in 2014, the Manila International Airport Authority put several aircraft up to auction, and one of them was a super constellation that had been built in 1953 for the US Navy. And we took the opportunity to purchase that aircraft. And while it was a reasonable price, I guess, when you consider an aircraft, what wasn't great about it is it had been sitting out in Manila in the open for 26 years. So it was heavily corroded and would never fly. Really, if you wanted to fly it, you'd essentially have to build a whole new aircraft. And that was fine for us because we don't fly any of our aircraft. All our aircraft is static display. So then the real work began because we needed to disassemble her, so pull her apart. And we did that very quickly to move her off the airport authority area at their request, and then started the fundraising and slow project. So, that was September 2014. And we would move the aircraft 2 or 3 times after that to different locations, each time, trying to raise a little bit more money before we could move it to the next section. And eventually we got it to the port in Manila in May 2017. And she came over to Townsville in May 2017, and then we trucked her to Longreach. And then in 2018, we really started the external restoration, which was incredibly hard work. And we had volunteers here for, 8 weeks or more, doing metal sheet work, stabilizing the aircraft, reassembling the aircraft. And then we had contractors that stripped the aircraft of its horrible paint, and then we repainted it. And with the help of Qantas, we actually got, livery designs based on the Qantas Super Constellation Southern Spray, VHEAM. And the paint workers did just such an incredible job. And then in 2019, we did the internal restoration, and we decided rather than, restoring the aircraft to look like a cabin, we would create a display about the Qantas constellations and then super constellations in the aircraft. So we have created part cabin, and then the rest of the display is sort of explaining the timeline of the constellations. And then right at the front, we have restored the cockpit, and by we I mean volunteers again. So something to really appreciate is, we had over 50 volunteers spend over 8,000 hours on that aircraft. So it looks beautiful now, but I don't think people really appreciate the blood, sweat and tears that these incredible volunteers did for us. But it's now here, and it's been open since the 1st of July as well. And it's just an absolute highlight and delight for me to show visitors.
Yeah, and I remember seeing the pictures that you sent me when I was doing the research for this piece. It looks really amazing, and it cost quite a lot of money as well, right? Because you had to bring it by sea, right, to from the Philippines, and I guess that's not cheap, and also all the materials, even if people were volunteers. I mean, you had to, I guess, spend a lot of money. And did it came from donations, or how did you do the fundraising to get it done?
Yeah, look, a lot of the fundraising, we did an awful lot of fundraising, and we did have some major supporters, one of them being Qantas. We also had a lot of in-kind support, not just from Qantas, but from companies like Lufthansa Technique in Manila. We also had the shipping company, Powerhouse International. While we did pay them to ship it, there was a lot of costs that they waived, and we're really thankful to them. So along the way, I think everyone, when they meet us and they hear the story we're trying to tell, it gets under their skin, and they really want to help us wherever they can. And we've been very lucky to have that. So yes, it did. It was a major project, and it was 5 years to complete. But we did get 2 grants from the Queensland government to finish this project. So and that came up to a total of $600,000. So
Australia.
Without them, we definitely
Australian dollars, huh?
Australian dollars, yes,
Yeah.
Australian dollars. But without them, we wouldn't have had the wonderful display we have today. So yeah, look, fundraising and we credit a lot of the people because the aircraft is really special to a lot of people. So even the mom and dads that just donated $100, it all makes a difference when you're running a museum. And then of course the museum, because we're not for profit, any admissions costs and things like that go right back to the museum to help us maintain displays, or in this case, create a display.
Yeah, it's an absolutely great story. I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna post the link so that people can check all the additional details there. And we've talked a lot about the present, the past. What about the future? What do you have in store for the future? Any plans that you can share at the moment?
Yeah, look, we always have plans. We don't sit on our hands, as our CEO would say. So we have some maintenance projects we need to do. So one of them being replacing the 747 cockpit windows. So those were damaged by the sun, but now that they're under a roof, we can replace those. So that will be one. Another major one will be to repaint the 747, the 707, and our DC-3. And we've got quotes for over $1 million to do that. Now that Australian dollars. Now that might sound like an awful lot of money, but you've got to remember those aircraft are huge surfaces. And also we'll be painting them here in Longreach. So that complicates things a little, but we will definitely get that done because they just need a bit of a touch up. But fortunately they're under a roof, so they're in a much better place now than they were before. And then the other thing we're looking to do is our air park roof was only stage 1. So stage 2 would actually build a walkway around the air park. So visitors would actually get an exterior perspective as they walked around the exterior of the enclosure. So, that's another project that we're looking at, and that's anything from $5 to $10 million for that one as well. So big projects, but we will work our way. We always have, and I'm sure we'll have people support us.
So just to wrap it up, what should people do in order to get more information about the museum? Apart from obviously checking the article I wrote back in the day, can you remind us the URL address?
So our website address is www.qfom. It stands for Qantas Founders Outback Museum. So www.qfom.com.au. And people can also, so you can get involved there. There's a newsletter that you can subscribe to. You can become a member and you get 10% off products in our store and free entry into our museum when and if you visit. And also just get involved in social media. We keep pretty active on our social media, and it's not just posts about what's happening at the museum. We also like to keep the Qantas story alive. So, we tell a lot of history on our social media. So we have Throwback Thursdays and things like that. So, if you want to stay connected or learn more about the Qantas story, and then of course, we would always accept donations. Every little bit helps, and some of the projects we've been talking about today, I think people can understand. We definitely try to tell the incredible story that Qantas has, and there's 100 years of them, so we haven't even scratched the surface.
What's the best way for people to donate? Just contact you through the website, and you then can direct the efforts in the best possible way?
Yes, they can. They actually can donate through the website, so there's actually options there for them to just donate straight. Otherwise, there's a form that they can fill out. But if you're happy to do it online, it's all there for you.
Excellent. Well,
Mm.
it's been a great story to hear, and to learn more about this fascinating museum. Definitely on the bucket list. But in the meantime, I hope that people will visit first the website, and then that some people will make all the way to Longreach, Queensland, to visit the museum. Thank you so much, Nicole. It's been great speaking with you. Hope the pandemic situation is going to get better soon, and you're going to be able to keep your agenda of events to celebrate this 100th anniversary of Qantas, which is a really, really, really unique occasion for any airline to celebrate.
Thank you, Mikhail. Lovely to speak to you and tell you about the museum.